frozen dog stands on two legs, its frost-burned fur tasting of salt. I kick the key off my doorstep, its brass weight unfamiliar against my palm. Salt spray stings my lips. The exact taste of my daughter's absence, the way her tears vanished before they could fall. The cat's matted grey fur scrapes the mine's window glass, claws scoring a slow rhythm against the pane. Dry rasp. A sound like broken glass, dragged over stone. Brass light catches the cat's eyes, reflecting the key's sheen. I ignore the silence where birds should sing. A thick, suffocating hush that feels like the absence of a scream. My knuckles whiten on the key. It's the wrong weight. Too light for what it represents, too heavy for what it is. The key that opens any door but locks it forever behind you. My daughter's door. The door I left open while she was alone. The salt on my lips isn't from the sea. It's from the void she left behind. The cat's shadow stretches across the floor closer than it was. I've been here for hours, tracing the key's grooves with my thumb, trying to remember the shape of her small hand in mine. The mine's entrance yawns behind me, a black moor smelling of damp stone and old iron. Dust motes dance in the brass light, catching the cat's reflection. Its fur looks like wet ash, matted with something darker. I think of the stranger who left it on my doorstep yesterday. No face, just a figure in a worn coat, standing perfectly still in the rain. The key was there, cold. I didn't ask why. I just kicked it. Now it lies on the porch, glinting dully under the single brass light. The cat's claws scrape again. Scritch, scritch, scritch. A dry, deliberate sound that vibrates in my teeth. It's not the sound of a cat. It's the sound of something scraping against the edge of reality. The cat's shadow on the floor is too long. It's stretching toward the threshold of the mine entrance, where the blackness begins. I don't look at it. I focus on the key, the weight of it, the way it feels like a promise I can't hold. Like the weight of my failure, the silence presses in. Not even insects, not a single insect buzz. Just the dry rasp of claws on glass. The cat lifts its head. Its eyes glow faintly in the brass light. They're not just reflecting the key, they're holding it. The key's image is trapped in the cat's eyes. The cat's shadow is stretching across the porch now, reaching for the key. The stranger's shadow. It's in the corner of the mine entrance, standing where the blackness meets the brass light. It never moves. It's closer. I can feel it. The cat's claws scrape the glass again. Scritch, 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 a sound like bone on bone. The shadow in the corner now touches the threshold, the edge of the mine, the line where the blackness begins. It's not just standing there, it's moving, it's closer. The key lies on the porch. The cat's shadow stretches across the wood. The stranger's shadow touches the threshold. I don't move, I don't breathe. The salt on my lips tastes like blood. The silence is absolute. The cat's claws scrape the glass. The shadow touches the threshold. The key turns with a sound that isn't metal on rust, but something else entirely. Whoosh, shattering ceramic. Like the crumbling of ancient bone. It echoes through me, vibrating in my teeth, sending shivers down my spine despite the mine's damp heat. The silence outside deepens. No insects buzz, no birds sing, as if nature itself is holding its breath. The cat's claws rake across my palm as I turn the key, glass fragments embedding themselves into my skin like tiny needles of ice. A coppery scent rises from the wounds, mingling with the ammonia tang already clinging to the air. My handprints stain the metal door red, corrosion spreading like blood poisoning. I try to close it behind me. Just a push, just an inch, but the key's paradox holds fast. The door swings open wider instead, revealing more of the mine's black maw. Its hunger is palpable, a physical pressure against my chest. I can feel its cold breath on my face, tasting of damp stone and old iron. The cat's claws scrape again. Scritch, 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 a dry, deliberate sound that sets my nerves alight with static. It is not just the sound of a cat. It is something else entirely, something hungry. The shadows in the mine seem to stretch and writhe at the noise, reaching out for us like twisted limbs. I step inside, the cat close behind me. Its massive Maine Coon form moves silently across the stone floor, its matted grey fur blending with the gloom. It is an eater of shadows here. I can feel it. We're not alone in this place. Something else is moving through these tunnels too. The silence presses against my ears now, a thick, suffocating hush that feels like the absence of scream. There are no echoing footsteps down here. The walls seem to swallow sound whole, but there is something else instead. A faint vibration underfoot, rhythmic and steady as a heartbeat. It pulses through me with each step, resonating in my bones. The mine's entrance yawns behind us now, swallowed by the darkness. The cat's shadow stretches out before it, reaching for the stranger standing perfectly still at its edge. The figure from yesterday. No face, just a worn coat and an endless void where features should be. It never moves, not even when we step deeper into its domain, but I can feel it physically closer now. The mine is not what it seems. The silence isn't truly silent. There is something else here, some unseen force humming at the edge of perception like a tuning fork on wrong. And the stranger, it watches us with empty eyes, its shadow stretching out across the stone floor towards our feet, towards me, and my daughter. The cat pauses suddenly, its tail twitching, its vocalizations start up again. Mew, whine, mule, a repetitive litany that grates on my nerves like fingernails down slate. It is not just a cry for attention, it sounds almost urgent. But there is no time to decipher the cat's intentions because something else catches my eye, a glint of brass further down the tunnel, caught in the faint light from above. Another key, or perhaps this one opens more than doors. The mine walls seem to close in around me as we move deeper inside. Cold stone pressing against my back, damp air clinging to my skin like a second flesh. The cat's shadow stretches out ahead of us still, reaching for the unknown. And behind us, the stranger stands silent and unmoving at the threshold, a constant observer, its physical proximity growing ever closer with each step we take into this twisted place. The lock mechanism is a puzzle of rusted teeth, each cog a jagged fragment of something once whole. My fingers trace the contours, the ridges catching at my skin like fishhooks. The cat's purr hums against my ear, a low vibration of forgotten syllables, furfathu, sophofits, thush, or thunai words that dissolve into static before I can name them. Its shadow pools at the threshold, a slick stain of ink spilled across the stone, and I can see the way it moves independently, like a living thing. The door is not just wood, it's something older, something that remembers. My breath fogs the surface, but the condensation doesn't bead. It folds, stretching thin as parchment before dissolving into the air. The cat's claws drag across the metal, not scratching but twipealing, as if the sound itself is an act of violence. The noise isn't just heard, it's tasted. A metallic tang pooling at the back of my throat, thick as oil. I swallow, and the flavor lingers bitter and wrong. The air inside the mine isn't still. It's breathing. Slow. Deliberate inhales and exhales. The draft carrying the scent of wet stone and something else. Something Fudialivi. The cat steps forward, its massive frame swallowing the dim light, and I follow, my boots crushing the grit beneath them. The floor isn't just dirt. It's ground down, the grain sharp as glass, each step a tiny wound. The walls press in, not with weight, but with purposey, as if they're adjusting to fit me tighter. Closer, my ribs ache. Not from the cold, not from the dark, from the toyed weight of it. The failure. The way her small hand slipped from mine in the market, the way the stranger's coat swallowed the light, like a black hole. I can feel the guilt pressing against my sternum, a physical thing, a tumor of regret. The cat's tail lashes and the shadows fuchi in response, recoiling like wounded animals. Further down, the tunnel splits. Left or right, the choice isn't mine. The air shifts, the draft pulling me toward the right, where the stone glows faintly, not with light, but with het. The cat's fur bristles not in fear, but in fear recognition. It knows what's ahead. I don't, but I follow anyway. The stranger stands at the junction, unmoving. Its coat is a void, a place where color should be but isn't. The cat's shadow stretches toward it, not as an extension of its body, but as something twin separate, something that twin wants it to touch. The stranger's silhouette doesn't flicker. It doesn't breathe. It doesn't twite or anything. But the space around it hums, a low, resonant twin thrum. Like the sound of 1,000 wings vibrating just beyond hearing. I step forward, the cat doesn't move. It watches. The stranger's empty eyes track me, not with interest, but with certainty. The air tastes of salt now, sharp and clean, cutting through the ammonia like a blade. My daughter's face flashes behind my eyes. Not her smile, not her laughter, but the way she looked when I turned my back on her in the market, the way her lips pressed into a thin line before she turned away. It's no longer a memory of tongues. It's a fawning, the shadow at my feet. Fall as unfurls, not spreading, but feeling back, revealing something beneath. Something that isn't stone, isn't dirt, but tor flesh. Raw, glistening, rong. And the mine, Shunbraith's Inn, the forgotten diving bell hangs like a metallic fruit from the mine's ceiling, its brass surface sheened with patina and neglect. It swings gently in the breath of air that moves through this place despite there being no wind above ground. The sound is bone-tapping metal, a hollow resonance, not quite musical but close enough to make my teeth ache. My tool, a length of bone stripped clean by time and hunger, scrapes against the bell's side. It sounds like a whisper turned inside out, raw, gritty, intimate. Copper blooms on my tongue at the taste of it, sharp as static electricity, grounding me here instead of lost in memory or fear. The cat stands beside me, its massive Maine Coon body barely visible in this light that is not truly dark but isn't quite bright either. Its matted grey fur seems to absorb what little illumination there is until only the brass highlights, where its shadow falls, remain visible. It watches me with eyes like wet ink spills. The air here hums, vibrating through the metal of the bell. Forgotten languages crowd my ears. Words that shouldn't exist. Syllables twisted into something else entirely. I ignore them because ignoring things has kept me alive this long. Besides, what use do I have for words when all they ever did was lie? The cat's tail lashes against my leg. Not quite a touch, but close enough to feel the vibration of it through cloth and skin. It echoes in my bones like distant thunder. Hrithersaith, Thunai, words I can't name because they belong to someone else's tongue. I reach out with one gloved hand, fingers brushing against the bell's surface. Cold seeps through fabric and flesh, settling into my joints like arthritis on a damp morning. The cat doesn't move, but its shadow does, stretching toward me until it touches my knee. The mine breathes around us, inhales as I lean closer to examine the locking mechanism, exhales when I step back suddenly at something unseen. Its air tastes of salt now, sharp and clean against the ammonia residue that lingers here like a bad smell you can't quite place. My daughter's face flashes behind my eyes. Not her smile, not her laughter, but the way she looked when I turned my back on her in the market. Thin lips pressed into a line before turning away, before disappearing into the stranger's coat black as oil and just as slick. That memory burns like acid at the back of my throat. The bell sways gently, its chains creaking softly. A sound that is almost comforting if you don't think too hard about why it shouldn't be there in this abandoned mine with no visible entrance or exit. But I do think about it because thinking is all I have left now. Thinking and regret. The cat's purr changes. It is still low, but there is an edge to it now. A warning growl buried deep beneath layers of remembered syllables. Its shadow moves again, this time peeling back from my knee like rotting flesh revealing bone. Beneath it, the stone floor isn't quite solid anymore. Flesh glistens raw and wet where it shouldn't be. Wrongness oozes out along with something else, something alive. It pulses rhythmically, matching the beat of blood in my ears. The mine breathes harder now, a labored inhale followed by a shuddering exhale that carries the scent of salt water and decay. The bell swings faster, its chains singing softly as they cut through air thickened with forgotten languages and wrongness. It is almost hypnotic, the way it moves, the sound it makes. But I can't look away because looking away means admitting defeat. And there are no second chances here, not for me, not after what happened. So I watch instead and wait for whatever comes next. Because something always does. In places like these where time doesn't move forward so much as repeat itself ad infinitum until even the worst memories start to feel familiar again. I stand before the mine door. A slab of iron as thick as my thumb and just as unyielding. It groans on its hinges, an ancient sound like bones creaking under strain as I push it closed behind me. The cat watches from the shadows, eyes wet, ink spills reflecting nothing but darkness. The door clicks into place with finality, or so it should have done. Instead, there is a hollow rasp as metal grates against metal, a sound that sets my teeth on edge like nails scratching down glass. I lean harder against it, feeling the cold bite through cloth and flesh until sweat prickles along my spine despite the chill. The cat steps closer now, its massive Maine Coon body barely visible in this light that is not truly dark but isn't quite bright either. Its tail lashes out suddenly, with whack, against stone, but it doesn't make any sound beyond a dull thud muffled by fur and flesh. It echoes nonetheless. Every movement here does, amplified by the silence of abandoned things. The door won't latch. The locking mechanism, a brass contraption that looks more like Art Deco than functional engineering, refuses to engage no matter how many times I flip switches or turn cranks. Each attempt sends a jolt through me, not quite pain but close enough for my nerves to hum with it. My handprints glow where they touch the metal, leaving behind an impression of corrupted brass that seems to writhe beneath my skin like infection. The cat's claws now scrape against the glass set into the door, the inside of it this time, and those copper-red streaks appear again as if drawn by unseen hands. They're thicker today, more insistent somehow, each one echoing with a sound somewhere between wet parchment, tearing, and ceramic shattering. Thorthus thunai! The air grows heavier too. Saltwater scent replaces ammonia residue until every breath burns like swallowing broken glass. My daughter's face flashes behind my eyes, not her smile, not her laughter, but the way she looked when I turned away from her in the market. Thin lips pressed into a line before turning towards someone else. Towards him, his coat black as oil, and just as slick. That memory burns like acid at the back of my throat, threatening to choke me if I don't swallow it down. I lean harder against the door again, desperation clawing through me now alongside frustration. The cat's purr changes pitch. The low rumble becomes a high-pitched whine that grates along my spine like fingernails on slate. Gurry. Its shadow stretches out from beneath it, reaching for the door with tendrils of darkness until they too begin to scrape at glass. The mine breathes harder around us now, a labored inhale followed by a shuddering exhale that carries the scent of saltwater and decay. It is almost hypnotic, the way air moves through this place despite there being no wind above ground. But I can't look away because looking away means admitting defeat. And there are no second chances here, not for me, not after what happened, as if summoned by my thoughts, or maybe it was the cat's persistent scratching. I notice movement in the corner of my eye. A figure stands there. A stranger who shouldn't be but is nonetheless physically closer than before, despite having never moved an inch since we entered this forsaken place together. His shadow has doubled in length, stretching out across stone floor like oil spilled on water until it reaches for me too. I freeze. Not quite fear paralyzing me so much as surprise at seeing him again here, when I thought he was gone forever along with my daughter's laughter and the warmth of her hand in mine. The cat falls silent suddenly. Its claws retract into velvet paws, leaving behind only those copper-red streaks on glass that seem to pulse rhythmically now, thump, matching the beat of blood in my ears. The stranger doesn't move, but his shadow does, stretching further still until it touches mine, and then everything changes. The lock clicked a dry rasp of brass against something softer than metal, almost organic. Not the satisfying snap of a mechanism engaging, but a yielding, a giving way that felt wrong. The door, a heavy slab of iron, swung inward with the groan of a dying thing. Dust motes danced in the meager light, disturbed from decades of slumber. It smelled of brine and something else, old wool maybe, or the ghosts of the men who'd last worn it. The room was small, crammed with the skeletal remains of diving suits. My boots scraped on the stone floor, each step a muted crunch of grit. The air was thick, not with moisture, but with a stillness that pressed against my eardrums. A pressure change, I thought, automatically cataloguing the sensation. My training kicked in, assess the environment, identify potential hazards, prioritize survival. But this wasn't about pressure differentials or structural integrity. This was different. The taste of salt coated my tongue, acrid and unwelcome. Not the clean tang of the ocean, but something older, something leached from stone and bone. The cat, a grey bulk of matted fur, entered the room before me. It moved with a languid grace that belied its size, its massive paws barely making a sound. It circled a rusted diving helmet, sniffing at the corroded brass. A low hum resonated from its body, not a purr, but a vibration that travelled through the floor and into my bones. It was a complex sound, layered with frequencies I couldn't quite place, a chorus of forgotten languages. The cat's memory, they said. It held the tongues lost to time, the words unspoken for centuries. I ran a gloved hand over the canvas of a diving suit, the material brittle and cracked with age. A faint tremor ran through the metal frame of the suit, a response to my touch. The cat's hum intensified, rising in pitch until it felt like my teeth were vibrating. It stood perfectly still, its gaze fixed on my hand, then slowly turned its head to the corner of the room, and there he was. The stranger. He hadn't moved, not even an inch, but he was closer. I was certain of it. The last time I saw him, he was a distant figure in the periphery, a shadow clinging to the edge of my vision. Now his presence felt palpable, a weight on my chest. He didn't meet my gaze, didn't acknowledge my presence. He simply stood there, a dark silhouette against the stone wall. The cat's shadow stretched out, elongated and distorted, reaching towards me. It wasn't following the light. It had a life of its own, a creeping, inky tendril that brushed against my boot. The metal of the diving suit felt cold against my hand, radiating a chill that went deeper than the temperature of the room. The cat's shadow touched my feet, then began to climb, wrapping around my ankles, my calves. It wasn't a physical touch, but a sensation, a draining of warmth, a creeping numbness. I tried to pull away to break the contact, but it was like trying to move through molasses. The shadow held me fast, its grip tightening with each struggle. The cat's hum reached a fever pitch, a deafening drone that drowned out all other sounds. The air grew heavy, suffocating. The stranger's shadow shifted, expanding, consuming more of the room. It touched my neck, cold and slick, and a wave of dizziness washed over me. The room tilted, the walls seeming to breathe. The diving suit swayed, their rusted metal groaning in protest. The cat's shadow, now fully encompassing my legs, gave a sharp tug. A force, subtle but undeniable, pulled me backward. Not stumbling, not falling, but forthdrawn, as if by an invisible current. I fought against it, digging my heels into the stone floor, but it was no use. The cat's shadow was too strong, too insistent. I was pulled backward. Away from the light, away from the door, into the deepest recesses of the room. The last thing I saw was the stranger, standing motionless in the darkness, his shadow enveloping me completely. The hum of the cat's memory faded, replaced by a hollow silence. And then nothing. The shard felt cold, almost eager in my grip. Not glass, not anymore. The material had shifted, grown dense. I pressed it to the iron of the door, a crude brand against the blackened metal. It wasn't a clean break. The glass didn't shatter. It yielded, sinking in with a sickening softness, as if the door itself welcomed the mark. A line began to form, not etched, but twig-grown tweed dress, the color leaching from the metal of the door itself, blooming outward like a malignant flower. The air, already stale, thickened with a tang that wasn't quite acrid, but metallic, coating the back of my throat. A phantom taste, like licking a spent bullet. The cat, a hulking shadow against the stone, didn't blink. Its eyes, usually the muddy green of sea glass, had caught the brass glow, reflecting the burgeoning scar with unnerving clarity. The reflection wasn't a simple mirroring. It was sweet-focused, intensified, as if the cat's gaze was the source of the light, not the reflection of it. A low rumble started deep in its chest, not a purr, but a resonant vibration that seemed to loosen the very stone around us. It felt less like sound, more like a geological shift. I ran a gloved hand across the newly formed brand, the brass cool and strangely porous. The scent intensified, but it wasn't simply metal anymore. There was something underneath, something organic, a faint, sickly sweetness. I had thought I was unlocking the door. Now, a cold, creeping realization settled in my gut. The key hadn't opened anything. It had sealed me in. A deliberate, meticulous trap. The mechanism wasn't about entry. It was about containment. A cage built around my assumptions. The mine air tasted of more than metal now. A faint, unsettling sweetness mingled with the iron tang. A chemical burn, almost. The sensation prickled on my tongue, a subtle corrosion. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt constricted, filled with grit. The walls of the room seemed to press in, not physically, but on my perception. The angles felt wrong, subtly skewed, as if the room was breathing, subtly reshaping itself around me. The cat's gaze intensified, and the vibration escalated. It wasn't looking for me, but through me, assessing the brand, evaluating the resonance. The room's temperature dropped, not with the bite of cold air, but with a leaching of heat. My breath plumed, but not from the chill of the mine, from something draining away from me. I checked my suit's internal temperature regulator nominal. The cold wasn't environmental, it was internal. The brass scar on the door pulsed with a faint, internal light. It wasn't luminescence, not exactly, more like a slow, deliberate expansion, a spreading network of veins beneath the metal surface. The stone around the door began to weep. Not water, but a viscous dark fluid that smelled of old oil and something else. Something faintly floral, yet rotten. It traced the edges of the brand, collecting in the crevices, amplifying the sickly sweetness. My boots scraped against the stone floor, each step now accompanied by a faint, unsettling foliage. The sound was subtle, easily dismissed as a trick of the ear, but it was there, persistent, growing with each movement. The cat's shadow stretched, elongated and distorted, but not by the light. It was reaching, not towards me, but towards the stranger, towards the corner of the room where he stood, motionless, silent. He hadn't moved, not a twitch, not a flicker, but he was closer. I could feel it, not a physical proximity, but a weight, a pressure on my senses. The air around him seemed to warp, distorting the light, making him harder to focus on. It wasn't a visual trick. It was as if the space around him wasn't quite real. The cat's shadow, now fully detached from its source, flowed across the floor, a dark tide creeping towards my feet. It didn't feel like a shadow. It felt like a draining, a siphoning of warmth, leaving a trail of numbness in its wake. It reached my throat, and a wave of dizziness washed over me. The room tilted, the walls seeming to breathe, to contract. The diving suits swayed, their rusted metal groaning in protest. Then a pressure on my throat, not a touch, but a presence. The stranger's shadow, expanding, coalescing, reached for me, tendrils of darkness extending towards my neck. It wasn't a swift movement, but a deliberate, inexorable advance, a slow, suffocating embrace. The cat's vibration peaked, then abruptly ceased. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full of anticipation. The brass scar on the door flared, bathing the room in a sickly golden light, and the darkness closed in. The cat's claws raked across the brass door, a grating symphony that set my teeth on edge. It wasn't just sound, it was a sensation, a physical vibration that seemed to resonate within me rather than against my eardrums. The noise wasn't cacophonous, but deliberate, calculated, each scrape echoing like a toll of doom. The door itself reacted, the brass scar pulsating with an almost organic rhythm, as if it breathed in time with the cat's scratches. It was no longer merely a mark on metal, it was a wound that seemed to throb and bleed light. The air grew thick with tension, and I could taste it again, salt water, sharp, and biting at the back of my throat. I tried to speak, to call out to the cat, but words dissolved into static before they reached my lips. It felt like screaming underwater, sound formed in my chest only to be swallowed by pressure. The cat paused, its massive head turned towards me, eyes glinting with an intelligence that was almost human-like. I looked at myself reflected in those glassy orbs, or where I should have been reflected. Instead of my face, there was nothing but darkness, a void staring back at me from within the cat's gaze. A chill ran down my spine, not because it was cold, but because something inside me recognized that emptiness. The cat turned its attention back to the door, claws scoring deeper this time. The brass scar began to spread like an infection, tendrils of light crawling along the metal veins. I watched in horrified fascination as the lines grew thicker, more pronounced, until they seemed ready to burst from their metallic confines. I reached out, absurdly careful not to touch the cat's fur. It still felt wrong, almost sacrilegious to do so, and pressed my gloved fingers against one of those raised veins. It was hot now, burning through the fabric like a feverish pulse. And beneath that heat, something else moved, liquid, viscous, squirming. I snatched my hand back as if burned, but it wasn't pain I felt, it was wrongness. A sensation not unlike looking at one of those impossible Escher drawings. Everything seemed to be moving in directions they shouldn't be able to move in. My stomach roiled, threatening rebellion against this new reality. The cat's shadow began to stretch, elongating towards the corner where that strange figure stood silent and still. It wasn't just stretching, it was growing. The darkness seemed to absorb itself into the gloom of the room until only a faint outline remained, like a negative image burned onto my retina by afterimages. Then I noticed something else. The cat's neck seemed thinner somehow, almost. Necklace. Not cut off cleanly, it was more as if its shadow had been eaten away from around that area, leaving behind an eerie smoothness where rough fur should have been. It looked wrong on a primal level, like seeing someone walk with their shoes on the wrong feet. I opened my mouth to call out. Not words this time, just sound. Any sound would do, but nothing came forth except for another burst of static. My tongue felt thick in my mouth, sluggish and heavy as if trying to speak was now beyond its capabilities. Panic surged within me like a physical force, threatening to drown out thought. The cat's shadow reached the stranger's feet, then kept going until it seemed ready to envelope him entirely. The room grew darker still, shadows deepening into something almost tangible. I felt claustrophobic suddenly, trapped not just by walls but by darkness itself. And that was when everything changed again. The cat's shadow had no neck anymore. The words caught in my throat, a useless tangle of syllables. I tried again, forcing air past the constriction, but only a choked rasp emerged. The forgotten tongue, the one the cat seemed to instinctively understand. Forefiend remained locked away, a phantom language I could feel on the edge of recall, but could not grasp. It was like standing before a door, knowing it led to a place of vital knowledge, but finding the knob inexplicably beyond my reach. The cat-ear's purr deepened, a resonant hum that vibrated not just in the air, but in my bones 187 hertz. I registered the frequency with a detached clinicality, as if cataloguing a scientific anomaly, rather than experiencing the visceral tremor that shook my teeth. It wasn't a pleasant vibration. It was a pressure, a physical force pushing against my sternum, threatening to collapse my rib cage. The salt tang on my tongue intensified, a metallic bitterness that coated my palate. It was the shadow that dominated everything now. It stretched, elongated, a viscous darkness oozing across the floor, and then, impossibly, it began to climb. It flowed upwards, a liquid tendril snaking around the cat, a neck, a warm, heavy weight pressing against the fur. I wanted to look away, to recoil, but my gaze was fixed, trapped by the perverse fascination of witnessing something fundamentally wrong. The stranger, his shadow, previously a faint outline clinging to the corner, now surged forward, a tidal wave of darkness engulfing him entirely. It wasn't a gradual process, it was sudden, instantaneous. One moment he was there, a silent, immobile figure, the next. His form was completely consumed, swallowed by the cat, as expanding darkness. The room felt colder then, the air itself seeming to condense into a palpable chill. The static in my head amplified, a white noise roar that threatened to drown out the rhythmic pulse of the cat. A spur. I blinked, trying to clear the visual distortion, but the image remained unchanged. The stranger, as shadow now extended past him, past the corner, past the very wall itself, until it began to overlap. With me, the sensation was peculiar, unsettling, not pain, not fear, but a profound sense of displacement, as if my own form were being overwritten, erased by something alien. I raised a hand, examining it in the dim light, but the skin looked wrong, too smooth, too pale, lacking the familiar texture of pores and fine hairs, my reflection. I desperately wanted to see my reflection to confirm that I was still Twain Mai, but the polished brass of the door offered no solace. It was not a mirror, but a dark, swirling void that seemed to pull at my vision. I forced myself to look closer, to pierce the swirling darkness, and what I saw wasn't my face. It was nothingness. A gaping, impenetrable blackness that seemed to stare back with an intelligence that was both terrifying and profoundly sad. The cat's shadow continued its relentless advance. It wasn't simply growing. It was time-consuming. It flowed over the floor, up the walls, across the ceiling, until the room felt less like a confined space and more like a cavernous void, the only source of light emanating from the pulsing brass scar on the door. I felt a growing pressure in my head, a throbbing ache behind my eyes. The taste of salt was overwhelming now, a constant, bitter reminder of some unknown transgression. The shadow reached my neck. It was warm, surprisingly so, and heavy, pressing against my skin with a suffocating weight. I felt a strange tingling sensation, a subtle vibration that resonated deep within my skull. It wasn't unpleasant, not exactly, but profoundly unsettling. It felt like assimilation, as if my very being were being absorbed, incorporated into something larger, something alien. I tried to move, to shake off the oppressive weight, but my limbs felt heavy, sluggish, unresponsive. Then I understood, the stranger as shadow. It wasn't just standing where he should be, it was a him. Or rather, it was what remained of him, a distorted echo of a man who had been consumed, erased, and replaced by something else. I looked up, and the shadow wasn't just overlapping mine. It was my head, my face, my everything. The cat as shadow, now a seamless extension of my own, tightened its grip. I could feel it, a warm, viscous pressure against my temples, my jaw, my eyes, my vision blurred, the room dissolving into a swirling vortex of darkness. I opened my mouth to scream, to protest, to fire anything, but the sound caught in my throat, another useless tangle of static. The cat shadow bit. My thumb pressed the key into the ledge's fissure, a cold brass weight against my skin. The mind's air tasted of wet stone and iron dust, thick enough to coat my tongue. I watched the key vanish, not fall, not shatter, but dissolve into the stone's shadow like ink into water. A sound like a wet bone snapping closed in my throat. Salt and copper flooded my mouth, sharp as a knife cut, coating my teeth, dripping down my chin. I tried to swallow, but the taste was inside my nose, my eyes, the metallic bitterness pressing behind my eyeballs. The cat's shadow stood where I'd been. Not a reflection, not a trick of light. It occupied the space, the air around it humming with a low thrum I felt in my molars. The stranger's shadow, the one that had been overlapping mine, that had been I was gone, erased. The ledge was empty except for the cat's shadow, stretching up the wall like a stain of spilled ink. I blinked. The shadow breathed. Not a sound, a movement. The space between its shoulder blades pulsed like a slow, wet heartbeat against the stone. I could feel it in my own chest, that same pressure I'd felt before, but deeper now, heavier. The salt copper taste intensified, a flood threatening to drown me. My hands went to my throat, fingers pressing against the skin where the shadow's weight had been. It was warm, not hot. Warm, like a sleeping animal curled against my neck. The brass eyes burned, not shining, burning, a steady, unwavering heat that made the air above the shadow ripple. I'd seen those eyes before, on the door, on the key's tarnished surface, but now they were Sufi, fixed on me from the shadow's face. The shadow didn't move its head. It didn't need to. The eyes were fixed, burning. I tried to step back. My foot slipped on the loose grit. The shadow didn't flinch. It just stood taller now, its edges dissolving into the mind's deeper dark. The salt copper taste was everywhere, inside my ears, down my spine. The air smelled of ozone like before a storm. The cat's shadow breathed again. A slow, deep inhalation that vibrated through the stone floor, through my bones, through the very air. I raised a hand, fingers trembling. I wanted to touch the shadow to see if it felt like the stranger's cold, like stone, or warm like the cat's fur. But the shadow was already gone, not moved. Just not there. Only the spot where it had stood remained, a deeper darkness in the stone, and the brass eyes. The taste of salt and copper was gone. Only the echo of that breath remained. The cat's shadow breathed, and it was breathing me in.